Hello. Today we're going to talk about lesson planning. Now, planning a lesson before you teach it is generally considered essential in order to teach an effective lesson, and it often receives considerable emphasis in teacher training programs. Although teachers, of course, vary in the nature of the planning they do and the kinds of information they include in lesson plans. From my observations, experienced teachers generally make use of less detailed lesson plans than novice teachers, and often teach from a mental plan rather than a detailed written lesson plan or a detailed description of aims and objectives. And indeed, studies of teachers' planning processes and planning thoughts have tended to report that experienced teachers seldom start with aims and objectives when they plan a lesson. Rather, they start with materials or content, and they think about students' interests and activities that may be required. They're also more efficient in lesson planning, and they often plan their lessons mentally with only brief notes as reminders. Their planning thoughts are often, too, much richer and more elaborate than novice teachers. Novice teachers tend to start with aims and objectives and to stick fairly closely to the prescribed curriculum guide. They tend to spend a long time preparing for lessons and to use fairly detailed lesson plans, which may include what they're going to say, what actions they intend to take, and even what they'll put on the whiteboard. Now, differences that we observe between expert teachers and novice teachers have been attributed to the fact, of course, that expert teachers have a very rich experience on which to rely. They've mastered a repertoire of routines from which they can draw, whereas beginning teachers have not. In planning lessons, teachers draw on their subject matter knowledge, their theories and principles, as well as their teaching experience. Now, this can be understood as a process of transformation, in a sense, in which the teacher turns the content of a lesson, the subject matter, into a form that is pedagogically powerful and also appropriate to the level and ability of the students. Of course, experienced teachers use these cognitive skills, if you like, every day when they plan their lessons, when they decide how to adapt lessons from their course book, and when they search the internet and other sources for materials and content that they can use in their classes. The ability to do this is one of the most fundamental dimensions of teaching, one that's acquired through experience, through assessing appropriate knowledge, and through knowing what learners need to know and how to help them acquire it. So when I work with novice teachers, this is one of the crucial skills I try to help them develop. While experience is crucial in developing skills of this kind, working with more experienced teachers in a school through activities such as shared planning, through team teaching, through observation and other forms of collaboration can also play a very important role in helping less experienced teachers understand the thinking processes employed by their more experienced colleagues. Of course, lesson plans are just that, and they often differ from the lessons teachers actually teach, since there are sometimes good reasons for departing from a lesson plan, depending on the way a lesson proceeds and develops. However, as we all know, lesson planning is an administrative requirement of many schools, and teachers are often required to prepare yearly, term, unit, or weekly and daily lesson plans. While teacher preparation courses usually emphasize the importance of preparing detailed lesson plans, student teachers find that experienced teachers often make different uses of planning in their teaching. They notice that few teachers around them spend time writing out detailed lesson plans, and certainly not ones containing formal aims and objectives. Perhaps they notice it's more common for experienced teachers to be making lists of items in the order to teach them, or jotting down rough notes or reminders to themselves about what they intend to cover. But lesson planning does serve a variety of purposes, whether it be a mental plan or a written plan. One important purpose is to help the teacher think through the lesson in advance, to think it through. Here, the teacher makes use of his or her pedagogical reasoning skills, by which I'm referring to those specialized thinking skills that enable teachers to transform potential lesson content into effective means of learning. In training programs, the lesson plan also provides evidence of having done your homework, of having researched and analyzed language for teaching purposes. But in addition to the conceptual and cognitive processes activated through lesson planning, it can also serve a number of other functions. These include, for example, to provide a framework or a roadmap for the lesson, perhaps to help think through and rehearse the teaching process itself. Perhaps for some teachers, a form of security. Also to help map out the sequence and timing of the activities that will take place in the lesson. It might also require the teacher to turn his or her principles and beliefs into practice. And lastly, it also may provide a record of what has been taught. So a lesson plan typically reflects decisions about a number of different aspects of a lesson. For example, the lesson goals. What are the general goals of the lesson? Activities. What kinds of things will the students do during the lesson, such as take part in a dialogue or free writing or some sort of brainstorming activity? The plan typically also identifies sequencing, the order in which activities will be used, including opening and closing activities. The plan will often also include information on timing, how much time will be spent on different activities, grouping, when will the class be taught as a whole, and when will they break up into pair or group work. Resources, what materials will be used, such as the textbook, worksheets, or DVDs. So these are some of the things that are typically included in a lesson plan. Lessons, of course, are very complex events, and lessons reflect the complexity of the processes involved. A successful language lesson is not necessarily one that realizes its lesson plan, because during the lesson, often unanticipated things happen, and teachers often have to revise their plans mentally as the lesson progresses. Classroom life involves multi-dimensional activities that often involve events that are immediate and unpredictable. And of course, they also occur in a public arena and may reflect knowledge of experiences and activities that have been experienced over long periods. However, the experience of teaching also enables teachers to develop their own personal theories and principles that they try to reflect in their teaching and in their lesson plans. For example, a teacher may arrive at 2 important principles that relate to how to motivate reluctant learners, such as make lessons learner-centered, or the principle, make learning relaxing rather than stressful. So, with principles like this in mind, as the teacher plans and delivers lessons, he or she then looks for opportunities to build these principles into his or her teaching. Teachers often make use of a set of core principles which are reflected in the kinds of teaching practices which they make use of. And these principles are based on background knowledge and experiences. So, principles can shape practice, but practice can also lead to new principles. A particular principle, such as make learning fun, may in fact shape a number of different forms of classroom practice. Now, here's some examples of some of the unplanned decisions that teachers reported that they made during lessons and the reasons that they departed from their lesson plans. Some had to do with timing, where the teacher dropped activities because of shortage of time or added activities to fill out time. Sometimes affective factors came into play. The teacher added an activity to liven up the class or modified an activity to increase its interest level. Sometimes teachers depart from their plans for pedagogical factors. In other words, they may change the sequence of activities halfway through the lesson. They may elaborate an activity because they realize it's not sufficiently clear. They may change the grouping arrangements, or they may change or drop an activity because it's proving too difficult. Indeed, they may add an activity to strengthen the lesson. Another way in which teachers depart from their plans is perhaps to add something that increases the language focus of a task. They may modify an activity to change its language focus, to maybe draw more attention to grammar or pronunciation. They may add an activity to provide more language work. So teaching can be thought of not so much as the process of realizing plans, but more as a creative interaction between plans, between student responses, and the teacher's improvisation. One teacher expressed it to me in this way. She said, "I always think of lesson plans as a kind of springboard. I never write them out in full, and usually I just work from a few points I want to cover. But I'm always ready to drop my plans if something comes up that I see the students want to spend more time on. Or perhaps they're having a difficulty with language that I had not anticipated, so I might need to spend more time on vocabulary or grammar or something." Another teacher commented on some of the changes he made during a lesson. He said, "I changed my mind twice during my last lesson, sensing that what I had planned was too much for the students. I think I must have taken into account their body language, subconsciously almost. I'd been going to get them to complete worksheets individually as homework for the next class, but then I decided to get the class as a whole to collaborate and do it as a whole class activity, pooling their knowledge. And it worked really well." Of course, two teachers may create very different lessons from the identical lesson content through these kinds of elaborations that teachers create while teaching a lesson. So, to sum up, a lesson plan is not a fixed template for a lesson, since teaching is often a process of improvisational performance. No matter how brief or detailed a lesson plan the teacher has, during a lesson, the teacher monitors students' performance and makes many individual decisions based on how the lesson's proceeding. These decisions may involve providing an explanation of a concept or language item, clarifying procedures to carry out a task, questioning students about language knowledge, or indeed changing the focus of an activity.